Okay, so I'm going to pick it up with the Enforcer plugin. Basically, the Enforcer plugin is a plugin that I made. And basically, as I said before, it's mainly because I had issues with Spring Security ACL. So let's take a look at Enforcer, and we'll look at the documentation for that and why use Enforcer. So basically, the thing is, what I would say is, if you can get away with just using role-based access in your application, and you don't have to go down to the level of ACL, do that. Because going down to the level of ACL or permissions and things of that nature makes things much more complicated. Now, with Spring Security ACL, one of the major issues that I had was all of the annotations of it are, and actually let's bring up Spring Security ACL just to show that, but all the annotations use this Spring EL language. So let's just pull this up so I can show some of the annotations. So it uses these, and basically these are just strings. So your IDE will never understand these, and basically will give you no help with these. So they're not like real code. So if you screw them up, it's hard to tell until sometime later in runtime and things of that nature. So even though it's common with Groovy to have find more errors at runtime than you do at compile time, this is just something that I find a little bit of a detriment. So the other problem I have is these are Spring Security. These annotations are done using proxies. So basically, it kind of wraps the object with a proxy. So if you call from the outside, say from a different class into this class, this annotation would get called. However, if I called from, say, this method to this method, which obviously they're not doing here, but if I did, this annotation would actually never get called. And I view that as an issue, to me anyways. It gives you a false sense of security. So that was one of the main issues that I had with it. The other thing is with Spring Security is its particular domain setup, if you look at it, is a very normalized structure. So, and goes across, I think, about 4 or so different domain classes. This kind of slows things down because, basically you have to join across, 4 or 5 different tables. What's stored in the ACL entry is a mask, so it's kind of like a fake bit mask. It's not a real bit mask, but it's essentially just a number, and which is actually kind of hard to read if you want to figure out what someone's permission is on a particular object. So when I did this, way back when at a previous company, just to find out what permission someone had, the query kind of looked like a 5-paragraph essay. Taking up a whole page. So it was fairly substantial, and it wasn't something that was easy just to understand. The other issue I had was with the particular permissions is they do not have a hierarchy. So in a previous job, basically we were using Spring Security ACL, and for about 1,000 containers, maybe it was or so, we had about 400,000 permissions. And basically, the way I see this is I knew our amount of containers was going to go up with the next project, which was building a project structure around what we already had. So this number would have gone up, exponentially, and it's like it was hard to maintain with what we had. So basically that was kind of all that was kind of the impetus for me to create Enforcer. So what Enforcer does, on the other hand, is it uses a Spring. It doesn't use Spring. It uses Spring Security, to for certain things, but its annotation is an AST transform. So the AST transform is, as I talked about before, is something that gets done at compile time. And with the way I did it, I made it so that it would take a closure. So by default, you would have one closure, which would just be code. So it kind of solves that issue with you having things like that Spring EL language that the IDE doesn't understand, to actually have code that the IDE does understand and can mark as an error or not. And the other thing was I extended this so that you could give it a failure closure. By default, it will throw an exception, and basically you could also give it a success, which by default will just return true, which is essentially a no-op. But it allows you to go a little bit further with what you're trying to enforce permission-wise. Now, Spring Security ACL, which I kind of skipped over this. The idea was that you would actually have permissions at the object level, and this allows you to do much granular things like, say, an invitation model where you share something with someone, or you give people particular permissions on the particular objects for whatever you're trying to accomplish. Now, Enforcer, basically, let's go to the application, and I'm going to check out my Enforcer plugin. Do a get k here. Not check out, but check out where I actually implemented it. And basically, in this one, I generated up a few new things. So basically, I have run its installation, like I showed you, similar to Spring Security. And what's in the documentation is you use the same package that you use Spring Security for, because this plugin is dependent on Spring Security, like Spring Security ACL is. But the way I do things is a little bit differently. I create a a Enforcer service, which this is put into when you install, is put into your control, so that you actually can do whatever you want within here. You can actually change how this works. So it has all the defaults with the a predicate conclosure, a failure conclosure, and a success controller. And this is what the annotation actually injects a method to call this. Now, what you'll see is basically with all of these closures, I set the delegate to this, so this it will inherit anything that is any methods that are in this class. But to make this much more extensible, I used traits. So I implemented a role trait, which just check roles, and a what I call a domain trait, which will actually check the permissions. Now, actually, with this, when I set up this application, I found that I had an issue with the way I had set this up. So there is a bug in the current implementation. I have to go back and make a bug fix and re-release this. But the thing is, this particular setup you can change. You can do essentially whatever you want. Now, as you notice, everything is red because I didn't actually do the refresh to pull in all my dependencies and things of that nature. So we'll just let that run, and eventually all these will change. Except for this one, because I'm using this as a trait. The Enforcer service actually defines this. So if you define it in both areas, it causes an issue. So the IDE doesn't know what to do with it, but it's fine. But as I said, you can actually go through and do whatever you want based on this. Another thing that the ID actually has an issue with, which will be fixed in a later version because I submitted a bug on this, is traits weren't allowed to have default values, which they actually were in particular version of Groovy. So even though this marks a lot of things as errors, these things are they are valid. So, but anyways, this basically gives you a very flexible structure for checking plugins that basically you can do whatever you want, because like with this I felt comfortable doing this level of security because this is more or less business logic security, and within business logic not everything fits neatly into an ACL. You usually need something a little bit more flexible, or you end up doing things around the ACL. So in my mind, the ACL has had its day. It's good for file-based permissions, but when you go to a web app, things get a little bit more complicated. So that's kind of why Enforcer was created, and it's basically taking advantage of a lot of the things that are built into Grails and Groovy. So if I go over to the project controller, I'm not sure why this is not resolved, but anyways, because I did run it, so it should be resolved. Has domain role. Anyways, it should work anyways, but this is like one of my checks. So I check has domain role editor on project, and if I go to the open up Bootstrap, I added some actual domain roles so that you can test and play with these within the application itself, similar like how I showed roles in the last video. So I think that's pretty much all I wanted to say about Enforcer. It's an alternative that I posed to Spring Security, so advertising my plugin a little. I don't think anyone's actually using it yet because there are no issues on it other than the ones I created for myself. For future things I want to do with it, but it might be a good starting point if you need this level of security as opposed to using Spring Security ACL because of the issues. Now, knowing those issues, you can work with them if you decide to, but that's up to you. So that's pretty much it for now.